And Iman is about to have this conversation that is looking at the cost of living crisis that continues to deepen in South Africa, and will continue then to bring you even some of the prices of how things look like at the shops.
And it is entirely shocking. And as Bongiwe says, just when you distill it down, you realize just over the passage of time how quickly food prices have gone up. So as this cost of living crisis deepens in South Africa, more and more people are turning into getting more debt to pay for basic food and basic expenses. Those who are most exposed are looking all over to access finance. Some people go to the formal credit market to cover their shortfalls, and there are millions more vulnerable people who simply do not come close to even qualifying for credit, and they are forced to borrow in the informal black markets from what's termed loan sharks, or individuals commonly referred to as Mashonisas. Loan sharks are open to negotiating. They often roll over a loan, incurring a new charge of interest. And insidiously, IDs or bank cards, even SASSA cards, are taken as security while assets are seized when payment isn't made. To help us understand how those struggling to find the extra cash to make ends meet are faring is Jimmy Golele, who is a Senior Education and Communication Officer at the National Credit Regulator. Jimmy, good evening to you and welcome. It is biting out there. The Financial Sector Conduct Authority has said before that more than half of South Africa's consumers are over-indebted, and more than half of the money that people are borrowing actually is for basic needs. So let's start with the picture of desperation in the country right now. How would you describe it?
Definitely the existing statistics that we get from our Credit Bureau Monitor report and our TCMR report shows that a lot of consumers are struggling. Out of roughly 27 million credit active consumers, only about 17 million are struggling to stay above board, and roughly 10 million consumers are struggling to meet their financial obligations to credit providers. A large number of consumers are in the red. A large number of consumers have been handed over to debt collectors for having failed to meet their financial obligations.
So the poorest in South Africa are spending even more on basics, and they're taking on debt to pay for food. And what we see happening is that it forces them into the clutches of loan sharks or Mashonisas. Just talk to us from your perspective, what this picture is looking like and what you'd like the public to know about them.
Certainly, consumers who are finding themselves no longer eligible to get finance from registered institutions or lenders such as banks eventually find themselves in the black market, borrowing money from unregistered credit providers. The first thing that we would like to emphasize to consumers is that as the NCR, we encourage them to, as much as possible, borrow from registered credit providers. However, if they find themselves in a position whereby they have to borrow from unregistered credit providers, or Mashonisas as we commonly call them, we encourage them to make sure they look at some things. For instance, the amount that they are borrowing from such a lender, are they going to be able to pay it back? And how long will it possibly take to pay them back? What interest are they going to be charged by that particular credit provider? But the most critical thing that we try to advise is for them to borrow money from credit providers or lenders who will not break the law, credit providers who will not take their bank cards, SASSA cards, and ID cards. However, should it happen that they are forced by circumstances to find themselves having to go to the other side of the fence, then they should take cognizance of the factors that I've mentioned so that they do not end up being over-indebted or find themselves on the wrong side of the practices of such credit providers.
Yeah, because what you mean by the wrong side or the other side of the fence is that this is criminal, right? These are illegal lenders. What they are doing is a crime. Is that right?
Definitely. The practice of taking consumers' ID cards, bank cards, and SASSA cards is prohibited in terms of the National Credit Act and is deemed to be a criminal offense. And therefore, should consumers find themselves in such a situation, we also encourage them to report such conduct or such practices to the National Credit Regulator and to the nearest South African Police Service.
But even the act of them lending money, just to clarify, is also illegal, besides the fact that they hold people's bank cards and SASSA cards hostage.
You are 100% correct. The act of lending money while they are not registered credit providers is itself a problem.
Right.
Ideally, any credit provider, in terms of the amended National Credit Act, which was amended in 2014, any credit provider must register with the National Credit Regulator and be given permission to engage in the credit industry.
Jimmy, many people find themselves in a horrible and a dangerous situation. You're asking them to report this, to report these loan sharks and these Mashonisas. But what happens afterwards? What recourse do they really have?
Each case will obviously be treated on its own merits. However, if they have reported such matters, we expect both the NCR and the SAPS to take the steps that are allowed in terms of the laws of this country, in terms of dealing with such a matter. As I talk to you, you will find in the news that the NCR and the Hawks have raided one unregistered credit provider in somewhere in Limpopo. That is because it came to our attention. It also came to the attention of the police service that there are such practices in a particular area called Ilim in Limpopo, and we then took the necessary steps to make sure that those who are doing business without the necessary permissions and provisions of the following the provisions of the law are taken to book.
All right, we're going to leave it there. I wish, again, that we had more time to talk to you. And that was Jimmy Golele, who's from the NCR, just talking to us about loan sharks and Mashonisas. It's part of our question of the day, and we want to ask from you where you're finding alternative funding or financial assistance during these times of hardship, especially if you're not qualifying for legitimate banking or loan institutions.